Well, hello friends. It's a beautiful day, so we better be out gardening, right? You know, this is the time of year where any nook and cranny I can fit in during the day, I'm gonna be outside. So a lot of times it doesn't happen till evening. It doesn't happen till after I get some of my other work done for my website and all those things. But when I can, I get outside, I garden because depending where you live, when you have winters like we can in Iowa, you want to soak in every beautiful moment of spring and summer you can. So today I'm kind of going a little bit rogue. It's not really, this is all about just like little things I want to get done and complete. And it's going to start on my back patio, which I don't show often on here. And you're going to see the real life here. You're gonna see how disorganized it is right now. My back patio can be a holding area. It can be an area in waiting. And there's a lot of things that are gonna happen here in the next coming months, but at the moment, it hasn't all happened. So what I do need to do is pot up a couple different ferns. I have a beautiful staghorn that a friend sent me that I got last fall, but it's just been sitting all winter in the plant room in a plastic container. I wanna pot that up. And then another fern in a container, which I'll show you. I'm looking at my back patio, by the way. And I'll show you that. And then we're gonna do a couple little fun things. I have a succulent planter I wanna put together. Kip is with us, just probably looking for a Frisbee. But we're just gonna go around, pop and get a whole bunch of those things done because isn't that kind of the best thing? Just, if you're like me, it feels like you always have a checklist in the garden, but every time you get one thing done, you just add another thing to the bottom of the list. So that's what we're doing today. We're checking some boxes and probably adding more. So my back patio, I'm gonna be honest, I did not even wash the table. I have to wash that about every other day because it's a glass top. And out here in rural Iowa, a glass top table, yeah, it gets dirty all the time. So those are my dining room doors, and right behind there's my dining room. Here's my kitchen right over here. But right now I've just been kind of setting all my plants out, and this is where I put a lot of my fern collection because this is the north side. Obviously it gets mostly shade. And we're gonna focus on this corner right here. So I have a beautiful staghorn fern that I have been looking for, this fine leafed one. It's a really kind of rare variety, or at least I should say it's rare for me to find. And you can see right there, it's that silver elk fern. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, and I'm excited to pot that thing up. Now, I love staghorns. You can see I have a lot of big staghorns on each side of the doors. This is a unique variety, so I'm excited about that. Now, I love the staghorn up here, but I don't want to keep it in this. I just brought this antique wire basket up here, and I want to put the staghorn on the floor just because it doesn't quite drape over the basket like I want. So we're gonna grab this pot and we're gonna go talk about ferns. Ferns always seemed really complicated to me, and I don't know, a few years ago, I feel like probably 10, I started really just deciding I'm gonna start getting some and playing with them. And I have found that honestly, they're not that complicated. You just have to find the right spot for them, and you really have to know how to work with your area. So for me, I don't have obviously lots of shade. So my front porch, underneath the covering, and then my back patio are really the two main spots. Kip did find a Frisbee. So what we're gonna do is go to my roving potting shed, which is the back of my gator. And I'm gonna pot these up. Now, I'm also gonna pot up a Boston fern, one of my favorite. It's actually a tigerwin. And I actually saved this from last year. And I find they're really easy to save, but I have to do a couple things to it. So let's kind of go over what I do to my ferns before we pot them up. So when it comes to potting these and saving them over the winters, I find saving them actually really easy. I put most of them in my plant room. Some ferns like this I actually keep as a house plant too, it just depends. So after a year of growth, a Boston fern like this, whether it's on your front porch, in a hanging basket, they get big, they get beautiful, but they also get kind of too big. I always find if you start to store them when they're fully grown, it can be harder to keep them looking nice. So in the fall, when I take all my plants in, if I have big Boston ferns like this, I split them. So this was actually a quarter of one plant at the end of last season. And then it was much easier for me to keep it over the winter. It started putting on new growth. It has new room for those roots to get into. Now, things like staghorns and bird's nest, I don't do that with. But Boston ferns, Kimberly queen ferns, both of those, that's how I keep them. So what I did was I found a pot. It's not gonna fit perfectly in that wire basket, but perfect for what we're doing. Now, I know there's different schools of thought on this. I always put a pottery shard in the bottom, but I always use something with a good drainage hole. So I know some people like to use, I don't like to use rocks. I don't like that. One, they're too heavy. Don't ever use styrofoam. I hate when people put plastic pots crumpled up in the bottom of a pot. Don't do that. If it's too big of pot, and you want to maybe either save on some potting soil or something else, put some hardwood mulch in it. You could put a few inches of that in and that's going to drain well. I just put a pottery shard. Now for this I am using just all-purpose potting soil. You know I always use it because it's all-purpose. It works for all things, but I am going to do a couple things to it since I'm doing ferns. I'm going to show you here what I'm doing. Now I'm going to put some in this bigger pot for the Boston fern. I'm going to put some in this gorgeous antique Roseville pot for the staghorn. Now I will say, I only use my antique pots for certain things that I'm really careful with because I have had them broken before and that's really depressing. Now, since ferns love shade, they also love acidity. So not only am I going to use biotone in the pot, which is just good for getting that roots to really get acclimated and started into this soil, I think of biotone as really good music that just gets you in a good mood. That's what it does for the roots here in the soil. So I'm going to mix that in, but then I'm also going to mix in, see, I keep everything on the back of my gator. I'm going to also mix in some Hollytone because Hollytone happens to be fertilizer for acid-loving plants. So hosta, really good with Hollytone. Ferns, really good with Hollytone. So when you add a little bit of it, it's really good for these plants. So always check on the different tone products. You know, there's so many different tone products. They can be good for multiple things. Hollytone also works on evergreen trees, just like evergreen tone. So sometimes you can use it for multiple things and it doesn't seem, if you're not using it very quickly, you can find other ways. So I am just gonna take this one. This one is actually up in my bedroom all winter and it put on some beautiful root growth. But it's always amazing to me. Any plant I save over the winter, I feel like the moment I'm able to put them outside, it's like a new world for them. They start growing with leaps and bounds. You know, now a greenhouse could be different because that can be a better environment for plants, but my plant room is not really a greenhouse. So it keeps things alive. It keeps them looking pretty good, but that outside heat, the outside humidity, even the rainwater it can get, that just all helps so much. So I'm just adding the soil around and then we're gonna take apart the staghorn. Now what you will notice with the staghorn, they get pretty gnarly roots, right? And they get these shelves on them. And these, in their natural habitat, help protect the plant and keep it upright. Now in this case, I may have to just cut this pot off, we'll see. And this is my one thing with staghorns. I will probably not keep it in this antique pot for too many years because what I noticed they almost do is cling to the side of pots and then you really want to use a good pot knife around it when you're taking it out. So you have to be kind of careful. Sometimes I just put them in terracotta ones I maybe don't care as much about, but this one is so pretty. I want to have a pretty pot for it. So I'm trying, we may just have to give a relief cut. This is why I have a knife with me at all times. We're just going to go in, give a nice relief cut to this pot, and look at that gorgeous root growth. Now, anytime I see that tight of root growth, which you can see all around here, that's really tight, I'm gonna go in and just break it up slightly. I'm just gonna go in, open it up a little bit, because the thing with roots, they want new room to grow, and if they get really tight on themselves, they can start suffocating. They can start making it so it's hard to suck up the water they need and drink. So if we can, I like to just gently take off a little bit of the bottom, but then go around and just open it up. And now we have a gorgeous fern. So just like any other fern, staghorns like moisture. They like to stay on the damp side. So on the north side of my patio here, I'm able to keep them pretty easily watered. And since it's somewhat protected from the southern winds in the summer, it's easier to keep them from drying out. So I'm just putting some soil here so it's easier to get to in a little container. And then I'll just top dress around here. We'll go set them there. I'm bringing in the final fern here and gonna set it in the basket. Now I do know the pot is gonna stick up over, which I knew it was going to, the actual basket, but this fern eventually is going to encompass and overdrape that pot itself, so I'm really not worried about that. I will, of course, water everything well. I think the important thing to remember with a staghorn, don't plant them too deep, along with any plant. That goes for a Boston fern, for this fern, whatever it is. And that's because when they're planted too deep, especially their shelves could be below that soil line and they could get waterlogged and start to rot. They can be very prone, even though they like that moist environment, they can be very prone to rotting if they aren't planted at the right level. So I'm gonna water now this Boston fern. What I usually do in this area is just display ferns. So if you notice, they're elevated by just little pieces of limestone, random block that I had. And then I'll always set one in front too, but you can see the 2 blocks there. And then this big bird's nest. I think I've had this in 3 or 4 years now. I always find with most ferns, don't put them in too big of container. Pot them in just what they need until their roots start getting bound enough that they need to go up a size. So usually when we say potting up, that means increasing the size of the pot it's in. When we just say repotting, that just means putting it in a new pot. So it just kind of depends. But you can see for as big a fern as it is on top, it actually has a pretty small pot. So that to me is always kind of essential, and it's something I've just learned with most ferns. Bird's nest, both of them, they like to be planted pretty high and be in a somewhat smaller container than you would think. Boston ferns can kind of fill any container you put them into and they grow fairly quickly. Staghorns, again, they like to start in a smaller container, only what they need, and they can fill it in, and you can even split them. I have split a lot of my staghorn ferns and now have way too many. I thought what we would do now is actually come over to my plant holding area, which it looks like a mess. I'm gonna be honest with you, but it's okay. We're friends here, so we can see each other's messes. And this is where I kind of pick and choose the random plants that I save over the winter and decide where I'm gonna use them, what containers they're gonna go into. And what I'm picking for now is the succulent container I like to put together up by my front door. And last year I had it in a longer trough. You may remember that video. This year it's a different container and I'll show you that. And I have a couple plants sitting by it, but I thought we could pick and choose a few others. So in front of me are a lot of my big agave, my pencil cactus, things I have left to do things with. And then this whole assortment of smaller, they're just different types of echeverias. Some of them I saved the labels to. This is an echeveria, the rose. It's a really pretty one. Now, a lot of them get leggy after last summer and then over the winter's growth. So when I'm planting them, I'm gonna show you how you're gonna think I mutilate them, but I don't. I help them, I promise you. And so I'm going to just pick a whole bunch, and honestly, we're probably gonna take most of these because why wouldn't we? And then we'll see up there what works to actually plant in. So for perspective, I'm at my front door. My front porch is obviously right here. And this antique cast iron urn is right behind the beautiful foxtail lilies. These are beautiful this year, by the way. I keep showing them, but look how fun they are with those Mount Everest allium. Anyway, this is the container you can see right here. And it's a cast iron container, so it's a 2-piece cast iron container, and it does have drainage. So this right here lets you turn it on or off, whether you want water to flow out of it. So inside, what I kind of like about these, the very bottom can hold some water, but then the drainage holes right here, which I have a little bit of hardware cloth over, and I will still put a shard over that. Then I'm gonna fill it with soil. I have a couple beautiful plants here that I've saved. Look at this burro's tail. It is massive. I literally took it out of the container that was here last year, potted it in here, had it in my plant room over the winter, and I've never had this much good luck with it. I'm not usually this pleased with something, but that really makes me happy. So obviously I'm working with a pretty small area. That's one of the reasons I love succulents. So this is full sun, southern exposure. It doesn't rain always a lot in the middle of summer, but this pot will be able to handle all these succulents, and you can jam it full because they thrive in that drier environment. They don't want wet feet. So outside I always find that they do so well. What I'm gonna start with is this big, beautiful burro's tail. I have never, now it will kind of break apart a little bit as I take it out of here. That's just kind of how they are. You can see the little pieces right here. They fall off so easily, but that's fine. So how I usually start plants like this burro's tail is just by taking cuttings and rooting it. So one of these long pieces, if I want to, like here's, oh, that one's so pretty, but I'll do this one. I will break apart a piece like this when I'm done, and I'll just stick it in different places where I want it, and that's where it's gonna start growing. So this is a little bit bigger one than I usually start with, but this is to me where some of the fun part comes in, because you can just start taking some of these really fun plants and you can just stick them in all over. So that to me is the fun of it, of saving these. Now I'm gonna show you what I do. This beautiful one, it fell apart. That's perfect. Do you know why? Because what I do to plant these is I take usually the top piece that almost looks like a flower. It's kind of that just traditional echeveria up here. I break it off, and you can maybe have to use a nippers too, which isn't a big deal if you do. But what I'm gonna do, now each of these leaves, if you wanted to, you could actually start little plants from, but I strip a few of those, start with a nice about 1 inch or 1.5 inch piece, and then I just stick it in the dry soil. So with all the succulents I save that get leggy, this is how I give them brand new life. I literally take the top of them, and again, it looks scary at first. Now, if you like the form, keep them like this. There's no problem with that. I like to put them in a container like this and have it look really tight and put together. So I go in there, break it off, and I know it sounds so scary, but it really isn't. So this is how most of these I've had 5, 6+ years. And what I do is just keep going in, breaking it off every year, putting it in here, and look how you can tell already this is really gonna come together. So I'm just gonna pot it up really quickly here, and we'll see what we get. So I want to show it to you now up close. You can see it is really jam-packed full. But look at all the interest. I mean, this is why we love succulents, because you can do so much with them. Now, some of these look small. They're gonna grow so much over the summer, put on better roots. I can probably even separate some here at the end. When I was cleaning up, I found one was still on the ground. So all I do, clean it up, have a piece about 1 inch long, and I just stick it in. That's really as simple as it is. So these someday will get bigger like this, and you'll just be getting more, so on and so forth. But what I think is fun is you can find them in so many forms. You know, here's one that drapes over. Here are ones that are more like flowers almost. Again, low water, don't mind the sun or the wind, almost actually thrive in it, I should say. And then when you go around, look at that burro's tail. So it's a really fun container, and I'll show it to you all summer and give you some updates. But let's go put in a couple big pencil cactus yet at the garden. So friends, we are way out down my vegetable garden. You can see the house in the distance. This is an area that obviously I don't want to put anything that takes too much time or care, and that's really what today is all about. That succulent planter to these. This is really planters that aren't going to get tons of water. I'm not going to spend the time to come out and water them if I don't have to, and only as needed really. So what I have, they're 2 cement planters. So they're wind stable, which yes, is important for me. And what I'm going to do is plant my large pencil cactus in them. Now, I have 2 pencil cactus. You of course always want to be careful. I've had many people tell me, I've researched it myself, they can be toxic, not only to humans, but to animals. Thankfully, I have a dog who could care less about any plant. Whether a piece breaks off or not, he doesn't care and doesn't ever bother them. But I like to elevate them and use them in this way anyway. You know, in southern states, they're a foundational planting and used up around houses. So you just have to kind of pick and choose where you're going to put them. Now, these have been in this container for about a year. No, they've only been, that's not true. They have been in there since last October is when I would have potted these up. These were at my front driveway last year. They were my entry plants, and I really loved them, but I just decided to go with something different there. So you can see over the winter how much growth their roots obviously did, because they are so tight in here. So I'm just separating some of that soil and popping it right in here. See how big it is? This is another reason I love succulents, because they can be a statement on their own. I mean, look how big and beautiful this is. Now, the important thing here is definitely to put soil around it so it can be sturdy and really stay. I did put biotone down in the hole already. Honestly, most succulents like this are not heavy feeders, but I think anything to help those roots just be happy is worth it. So I'm gonna put some soil around this and get the other one done. So I'm gonna step back. Everything is so green now. Eventually, imagine this field will be planted, I think with corn this year. I'll have zinnias in this bed, but then these two are just big structural planters. Now what I did do is split one lemon coral sedum and put some in each one, but I also noticed that if you look really deep down in, if we take that, there we go. There's some lemon coral sedum that is still living from last year. So lemon coral is another great one. It's an annual for here where I live, but you can take little pieces of it, just stick it in, and it will root. So if you see, what is really fun, and I'll show you this again on stories later on, in the sun, these get fiery red on the tips. They're just beginning to up here, and they really just explode with color during the summer. During the heat, they thrive in it. So that's why I really love to use them out here. Now, both of these are starts from the main larger plant I've always had. So they grow honestly fairly quickly, and they're kept in check by removing them every year, putting them back. Now what I probably will do, just because for looks, is remove this big branch here. And I can just stick it in a pot and give it to someone. So that was a few checks off of my list today. The list is not done, which by the way, as I'm walking past, lots of lettuce to get in. Isn't it beautiful? There's lettuce, there's radish to get in. The spinach and arugula are actually doing really well. There's some bok choy. I even had planted some rapini, and that looks ready too. So I have some work to do, and I actually have asparagus to get too, which is right ahead of me. So it is a year and a time of year where we are full of a checklist, but it's always fun, and it's always, I think, exciting to not only check a few things off, but do things that make you happy. Planting some succulents that I save year to year, that makes me happy because I see my work coming to fruition of being able to save things and then plant them year after year. So I'm gonna get in some asparagus. I'm sure you have a long list. Tell me what some of your checklist is to do in the comments, and keep on gardening because it's therapy, right?